You can cross me off of your wish list. Call Santa Claus and the missus. We gon' have the best Christmas that ever existed. Hey sis, it's Christmas. Come on over, bitch, you can't miss this. Don't need gifts, now can I get a witness? We gon' have the best Christmas that ever existed.
Hello and welcome to Expected Own Goals. Lots of things are still happening, even though there's a moratorium edition. I'm your host, Eric Morgan.
I'm Evan Davis. Yes, transaction moratorium in place. Announcement moratorium, very much not.
You can say whatever you want.
As long as the deals were done last week, you can announce them all through the holiday season. We've got a lot of things to catch up on, actually, since we were last with you on main feed last week. Becky Sauerbrunn retired. Were you surprised by this announcement?
In some ways, I think this is the least consequential piece of news because I wasn't surprised by this announcement. The most we had expected from her was coming back to the Thorns on a 1 year. So if that's where your expectations are, the idea that a player who is approaching 40 isn't coming back for their age 40 season shouldn't surprise anyone. She's been a notable Iron Woman. She's accomplished so much in her career. And I'm not sure what another season with this iteration of the Portland Thorns would have proved or changed.
And also it makes going out and getting Sam Hyatt and the young Brazilian Diane, that all tracks now. They still only have 3 center backs, but
we could talk about Diane just being Isabel Obey's Volume 2, which is to say, I'm not sure can compete in this league.
Or she could have a Bia Zanerato kind of campaign. I mean, there's a very high degree of variance with internationals.
She's a non-peak aged international who is not on a top team in Brazil and has a limited number of caps. It feels more like some of the hit or miss Portland Thorns decisions that have been coming down the pike more recently, as opposed to something that was as thought through as maybe a Kansas City Current decision.
She does have some European pedigree. She's played at PSG. She was at Real Madrid for 3 years, albeit in a different stage of Real Madrid's history. She was a hinge player on the CD Tacon era into the official Real Madrid era. So she has some seasoning. I don't know how many caps does she have for the national team. I actually don't know.
I think it's like 12.
She had a substitute appearance for Brazil in the World Cup in 2019. She plays a position where if you're not first choice, you're not necessarily going to get a lot of minutes at major tournaments. But there is potentially something there, or potentially could be a bust. Again, there's not really somebody driving the ship in Portland at the moment.
Literally that. And also just like, consider me skeptical until Portland's hit rate gets higher with international random transfer who maybe put some time in at PSG.
Sure.
You know, like, I think the Sam Hyatt signing is one that you can point to and say, okay, I can look at this and evaluate this and see this having some real upside. I think there's just a lot more unknown here. But Becky Sauerbrunn, who may have still challenged for a starting job in Portland, given what they currently possess at the back, that says enough about why I might not return to my age 40 season for the Thorns if I could still challenge at that role. How many caps did she end up with the U.S. women? 200 something? It's 200, a stunning number.
Something like that. She's the only player, I believe, in history who had at least 180 caps for the U.S. women and appearances in the NWSL.
Yeah, and Becky Sauerbrunn is one of the last veterans of the WPS, or was one of the last veterans of that, to retire.
Yeah, God, there's really not that many left. It's yet another chapter of U.S. women's soccer history going by the wayside. I mean, 2 World Cups, a gold medal at the Olympics, 3 NWSL championships, 4 NWSL Defender of the Year awards. No one's won the award more than she has. She won the first 3 in a row. And by all accounts, one of the greatest human beings off the field as well in the game.
Yeah.
And a pretty good broadcaster, I must say. I've really enjoyed her when she shows up on Sam Lewis's show.
Some media company will snap Becky Sauerbrunn up, and she will be a retired player turned pundit for someone who is smart enough to hire her. Who knows? Maybe Netflix. Maybe Netflix for their Women's World Cup coverages.
Oh, that's true. That's another piece of news we'll have to discuss later down the line. I have a Becky Sauerbrunn story. I was covering the NWSL Championship in 2015. Becky was there with FC Kansas City. It was in Portland. We were having a media scrum with her after training. We were hot off the heels of Abby Wambach retiring, a lot of discussion around the status of players in their 30s, what their futures were going to be, especially at the international level. Sauerbrunn had just turned 30 that year. She had turned 30 in June, I believe. I said in this media scrum, there's a lot of talk about people who are a little bit later stages in their careers, continuing with the national team. Do you plan on still making yourself available and fighting for a place? I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something like that. And she bored holes through the back of my head with her stare. And she just repeated my question back verbatim to me as an answer. She's like, I plan on continuing to play for the women's national team in the years to come. I was just bodied. And that was 9 years ago. And she just retired. And very much should not have retired then. She's a big part of why the team won the World Cup in 2019. Good on you, Becky Sauerbrunn.
She's one of the last of an iconic generation of U.S. women's players and will be a no-doubter X-Zone Goals Hall of Famer next season. All right, let's move on and talk.
Something that just literally broke today, Monday, just before we started recording. That has not been made official, but the news broke and the sources are trustworthy, so we're going to run with it. And that's, as believed, as rumored, Jonas Eidevall is now the head coach of the San Diego Wave.
Fine. Eidevall comes in as a divisive-ish figure, coach with some pretty decent pedigree, who I think is like a lot of other coaches that we've discussed, which is to say, I actually don't think Eidevall's like a big difference maker as a coach. I think he is in that sort of bang average range of coach. It'll be interesting to see how he deploys the various pieces that San Diego have.
A roster that is still being rebuilt in his absence by Camille Ashton. Arsenal fans despise him. There has been a lot of chatter that he had lost the locker room, and that was the primary reason why he felt he had to resign back in October. There are certain corners of the internet, and I do not know how much of this to believe, is that it's not just him losing the locker room, that there may have been some more heavy level toxicity from him. I don't know the veracity of that. I don't know how true that is. But he completely bungled the Viviana Miedema situation. He obviously had this very love-hate relationship with Emma Hayes as a rival when he was in the league that led to her poking her finger in his chest and him screaming at her after Chelsea lost the League Cup to Arsenal back in March. Tactically, seems to be the kind of coach that rejects the idea of individual attacking approaches, which you worry with players like Delphine Cascarino, Maria Sanchez, and Jaden Shaw. How's that going to kick on? Is that going to be the right attacking fit? There was a rumor a week or two ago that Naomi Gurma might be leaving. How do you rebuild that defense in her absence? This is very much a rebuilding project. And we've talked about Lauren Leichman coming in as a new owner, Jill Ellis leaving for FIFA, and Camille Ashton getting her first full offseason as the GM. This is a club very much about to try and figure out the next phase of its existence. It seems like it was a pretty toxic and horrible place to be while Jill Ellis ran things. Is Eidevall really going to be the kind of person to help mend those fences? I don't know about that. But if you look at it from a totally value-neutral point of view and just say maybe he just wasn't the right fit for the players at Arsenal, which is being very charitable to him, I still think you're probably more right than not that how much does he really move the needle at the end of the day as a tactician?
He is someone who has yet to demonstrate playing above his talent level. Arsenal often probably underperformed the talent they had. Some of that, I think, is just that's the way the cookie crumbles, the ball, just some misfortune.
Lots of injuries, Miedema being out, Leah Williamson being out for long stretches, Beth Mead having an ACL tear. These all happened under Eidevall's watch. But even so, you compare him to City and Chelsea, the 3+ seasons where he was in charge across all competitions, like non-penalty XG differential per game, he's still comfortably third place behind those two squads in aggregate across all that time.
And I think it would be fair to say that he may or may not have had the third best team in terms of just raw talent on hand.
Mm-hmm.
But if we want to give him the benefit of the doubt on who Arsenal was, I still think he's not an above average tactician. His teams do not play above the quality that is there, which means at that point you better be a really good personality hire, and it seems he's not that.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the best way to spin it, is that he's just not a good personality hire. It could be much worse than that.
There are two types of assholes. There's the asshole who just gets results. Jose Mourinho is a classic example of he's an asshole, but he gets results. Then he stopped getting results. Then he's just an asshole. Eidevall doesn't have that track record of getting results.
No league
to
titles.
Go back on.
No Champions League titles. One Champions League semifinal appearance. The only silverware he's got to his name is 2 League Cups.
If I am a Wave supporter, I think that this is probably not the worst hiring you could make, but I think best case scenario, you are looking at a team that currently is unevenly built and has probably the 6th or 7th highest talent pool in the league currently. Last year performed kind of like the 6th or 7th best team in the league, and we're unfortunate. I think there's a real pathway to success if Eidevall just plays at his talent's level, because it'll look like San Diego rebounded from a bad season. I just don't necessarily think he's the player to move that team into the future. And if it turns out the personality hire aspect of who he is ends up costing you, say, Naomi Girma or Jaden Shaw or any other sort of luminary you have in your team, he'll be a net negative hire.
And if it turns out that he is a genuinely like emotionally abusive guy, like if these rumors are true that he's a genuinely toxic presence, then this is a disaster and you're putting a lot of people in harm's way. The best thing that we can say about this is, I don't know, we'll see.
Let's move on and talk the biggest offseason trade so far.
Definitely.
Not even that close. Lynn Williams, another Gotham departure to Seattle, along with Cassie Miller for Jaelin Howell.
Jaelin Howell, an international roster spot and $70,000.
Jaelin Howell, to me, is the most interesting piece in this trade.
It's a little bit of a reimagining of what Juan Carlos Amoros's Gotham midfield might be, just because Sheehan was much more of an in-possession type of central mid. Did a lot of graft work off the ball, but wasn't the most special of off-ball defenders. But Howell has a pretty large reputation for being this midfield destroying weapon. She was not good last year. Was that her fault? Was that Louisville/Seattle's fault? Great minds may disagree, but she had a real down year. She's young, so she might bounce back. This might be a blip. But does this mean now Amoros has to rethink what the midfield looks like, because now you have 2 defensively minded central mids in Howell and Neely Martin to take the reins? You don't have the in-progression go-between to try and get Lavelle the ball, because Howell is not going to be that player at all. She's not a passer. She's not a deep-lying playmaker in any way, shape, or form.
She is of the destroyer variety of
and
6.
Neely Martin isn't much of a passer either. So where do you get central progression now if Howell is starting right out of the gate? The funny thing, of course, is that the 2 seasons that Amoros has run the team from the touchline is the opening day lineup and the playoff lineup are always incredibly different. And the players he seems to think will be part of the core 11, whether through happenstance or this is just sort of how he operates as a coach, that he needs to find it and feel it out as the season goes on. He's always counting on different people in November than he is when things kick off at the start of the year. So maybe Howell isn't even necessarily going to be a starting number 6 by this time next year. I mean, who knows?
Here's what I love about this deal for Gotham, because I think that they win this trade, which is probably not how other people will view this. Jaelin Howell, the 2022-2023 versions of Jaelin Howell were in the mix for our conversation for like player that should be on the plane to Australia, New Zealand. A unique destroying midfielder force inside the U.S. women's apparatus and setup. Subsequently, I think she floundered in Louisville and floundered in Seattle last year. Seattle was really just a layover. I think it would have been very hard to be productive in that team, particularly in the back half of the season.
Yeah.
Full stop. What Jaelin Howell does in playing the way she plays number 6 allows Jenna Neiswanger to be liberated to do more attacking next year.
Sure. Plugs that hole.
And what you may not get in ball progression from Jaelin Howell, you might be able to get out of Jenna Neiswanger. So I see them as really complementary pieces. I think Jaelin Howell can do what she wants, which is basically just run amok, win the ball, get stuck in, then rely on others for distribution. I think if we've got Crystal Dunn actually coming back and buying in, you potentially have a number 8 there that you can use as ball progression.
Sure.
So I see the pieces, not necessarily the way Amoros has used them. I also see Bruninha, who can be a little soft on the defense. I see Jaelin Howell as a solve for a lot of what didn't work for Gotham.
If she can get back to her prime form.
Totally. Yeah. But I also think that we had someone like that under Amoros. The signing of Tierna Davidson for Gotham is what you're looking for here out of the signing of Jaelin Howell, or the trade for Jaelin Howell, which is to say, you know that the bones of this player, you know that what they can be is very good and fit your system, and that they just found themselves in two systems that no one really could have succeeded in.
Her aggressiveness certainly plays to Amoros' strengths. She's only got a year left on her deal. We haven't heard an announcement of an extension or a new contract. So if that doesn't happen, then it's pretty low risk for Gotham. Or if she does really well, especially out the gate, you sign her to an extension, bing, bang, boom.
This will be her age 20.
It'll be her age 25 season.
She has demonstrated in the NWSL that she can be an elite 6, particularly if she's in a system that plays to her advantage. I think she will be entering for the first time in 2 years a system that plays to her advantage. And I think that she's the right age and the right price to take this exact risk on.
Yeah.
I think that there are very few teams in the league that wouldn't benefit from the addition of a Jaelin Howell, regardless of how down last season was. And I think she can activate a lot of the underperforming parts of Gotham. And so I think there is a knock-on boon to the statistical output that you could expect from other members of the Gotham squad still there.
Gotham needs 1 or 2 goalkeepers to back up on Katrinberger because they're a little threadbare in that department at the moment, but that's not a big problem to solve. No. Let's talk about Lynn Williams for a minute. So she's going to be 32 in 2025. She had a very strong year at Gotham last season when she was healthy, which maybe is the operative phrase here, but she is going to
the Seattle team,
who is not going to be re-signing Zierra King, it seems, if we're reading the tea leaves right. Which means that Williams is essentially functioning as a King replacement, depends on what they do with Trina Gorcevic and Aurelia Mondesir. But they just got a lot older, if that's the case, on the front line.
I think somebody on the Discord said this, and I thought it was right, but I thought it was maybe the wrong takeaway, which is they have essentially flipped Bethany Balcer for Lynn Williams, but I actually think that is bad because Lynn Williams, age 31, with limited ability to play full 90s, does not solve any of the problems that Seattle already has. They got older through this deal. I thought Jaelin Howell was one of the few players that they had that was like a real net positive for them moving forward. Now they are without that. Obviously, Laura Harvey did not see the value in Jaelin Howell, or that did not fit the Laura Harvey system.
Yeah, I mean, there are complicating factors behind this. Lynn Williams wanted to leave the team, and she wanted to play on the West Coast, and so it was a matter of trying to find a trade partner.
Seattle need goals, and if they can keep Lynn Williams healthy and in the lineup, they will get goals out of Lynn Williams.
Yeah.
I don't know how Williams and Heidema play together.
Well, Williams has become more comfortable on the wing as she has gotten older. If there's one way to spin, if you talk about like you trade Bethany Balcer for Lynn Williams, like Balcer and Heidema it just wasn't working.
It's a terrible pairing.
It's a terrible pairing because they just want to be in the same place at the same time. And it was never going to click. So you can get a little bit more field balance by having Williams there in lieu of Balcer. That's the one thing that you might say advantages Seattle in this continuum. But it still remains that she's going to be 32 and you can get goals from her, but she's not going to get any younger. What is the health situation? Can she stay healthy for a full season? Because last year was a real struggle to keep her on the field.
Williams is a very serious upgrade from Zierra King. No question. How much Lynn Williams you get next season is a big question mark. If I'm a Seattle Reign supporter, I'm stoked to have Lynn Williams because I love Lynn Williams.
Yeah.
But if you give me the blind choice between a 32-year-old striker who logged 1,100 productive minutes, and an age 25 defensive midfielder who is a season off of being like one of the best sixes in the league, I'm taking the 25-year-old number 6 all the time.
Yeah, and then maybe the bigger question for us is Lynn Williams very cryptically referred to what the behind-the-scenes situation at Gotham is right now when she talked about this trade on Sam Mewis's show. We have heard for a little while now a lot of rumors, none of them substantiated and none of them shaded in with any kind of context that something's not right behind the scenes at Gotham at the moment. Is it with Juan Carlos Amaros? Is it with the organization as a whole? Is it just one or two players? Is this a squad-wide issue? We don't really know. But Williams, it seems, was not happy anymore. Yep. And I don't think it has much to do with playing time because she lost playing time slowly through injury. I was just looking at the back end of the season, even including the 2 playoff games. She started 5 of the last 7 games of the season for Gotham. So she was still a very central part of Amoros's plans on the field. So if she wasn't happy, it was something that was going on in the locker room. We just don't know what it is. And that does not augur well considering that Delaney Sheehan is gone. We still don't know really what's up with Crystal Dunn or what the contours of that exactly look like. Could there be more players departing? We don't know that yet, but I'm seeing some smoke. I don't know the source of the fire, but I'm seeing some smoke.
Gotham, who I think we both felt great about going in last season, the error bars are just a lot wider now. I don't think Gotham, even with the loss of Delaney Sheehan and Lynn Williams, I don't think Gotham has taken a huge hit in terms of talent out the door so far.
They re-signed Mandy Freeman,
who I think proved herself to be a great shutdown wingback in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps that might mean that this isn't a squad-wide issue, that she would want to come back to Gotham. Although re-signing doesn't really mean much of anything. She might have felt that she had no better choice, despite whatever might be going on offseason. Again, it's all speculation. No, there's no hard evidence about anything. But you're right. I mean, between Astaire, Yasmin Ryan, Ella Stevens, maybe Midge Purse resigns, we don't know yet. Their attack is not lacking. If they can figure out the number 8 thing, the midfield looks like it's in pretty good shape. And with Freeman coming back and with Jess Carter there, their defense is in pretty good shape too.
On talent, they're no worse than the 4th best team in the league going into next season.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's changed very much. And they've not lost, in my mind, the most crucial pieces of that.
Yeah.
Astaire, Rose Lavelle. I think there's been a lot of doom and gloom about what's going on at Gotham, and I think they maybe won this trade. Certainly from a financial standpoint, Lynn Williams and Cassie Miller almost certainly cost a lot more than Jaelin Howell does coming back.
Yeah.
If that provides you the freedom to re-sign Midge Purse on a favorable deal or to go into the global market and find someone, or dare I say sign Caroline, who is still out there. I know, the pipe dreams of the Gotham faithful. But this is a move that does free up some cash space to go sign someone else. So by no means is Gotham the finished article, and I don't think that they've taken a huge hit in terms of first-team talent. I like this for them, even if that puts me in a minority, the immediate snap judgment online assessment of this deal.
Let's talk about a deal where I got to break some news.
Yeah, this was fun.
I should also say, I mean, we're talking about Alex Loera getting traded to the Utah Royals. I was on the desk to break the news for Equalizer about this, and I had sources that I was getting confirmation about this deal from, but I wasn't the only one. This really was a team effort. We had a couple of other people at the Equalizer team working their sources as well to get this news confirmed. So it very much was an Equalizer news break, but I just happened to be the one who first got a smell of it and was able to run the story, which was fun. It was a fun experience as someone who has been in this business for a very long time, but has never actually gotten to break news before. So that was very, very cool.
I was proud of you,
Thank you.
Evan Lois Lane Davis. I was so proud of you for breaking this fascinating trade, because it is to me like one of the more deals of this offseason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll talk about the return that Bay got. Bay got $25,000 in intra-league transfer funds, that fun piece of word salad we learned from last year. And they got a 15% sell-on fee, which means that if Utah ends up trading or transferring Loera at any point before her contract is up, Bay gets 15% of the transfer fee. I think on the merits, as it stands right now, in terms of the money that is in Bay's pocket at this very moment, Bay got fucked. it has the potential to maybe net out for them down the line if Loera stays healthy and hits her potential and maybe gets moved before her contract with Utah wraps. But Alex Loera, despite the fact that she's only played 1,200 minutes across the last 2 seasons, bad foot injury that forced her to miss a lot of time in 2023. Obviously, she tore her ACL in April of last year. Despite the injuries and the lack of playing time, and despite the fact that she plays a position that isn't always worth quote unquote top dollar in the transfer market, given her age and her talent ceiling, this is not a player that's worth $25,000. And so then what was Bay's thinking in moving her for this kind of money?
I'll stop short of saying Bay got fucked on this deal, because I think there are plenty of good reasons not to continue with Alex Loera. We don't know what the disciplinary issue was that got her in trouble before leaving. It seems like there was probably not a great relationship there with her and Albertine Montoya.
But she went straight back into the starting lineup. She did not lose her captaincy.
You're not wrong. And then you just don't know about the unknowns of health are a thing. That said, Alex Loera was on decent money at Bay.
Decent money, not six-figure money.
Not crazy, but I think that Bay do need to free some capital however they can. I don't think this probably moved the needle a long way there.
It didn't, and obviously we know the big contract that will help them in that regard, Dana Castellanos, which is going to be a harder contract to move. So maybe the next best option was to try and get Loera just to give you some measure of wiggle room. And I guess you can also argue that given the season that Kiara Pickett ended up having, that you feel maybe you lose less value at that spot on the field.
That's sort of where I'm at with it, where I think that by the end of the season, I think Bay had sort of plugged the hole that Alex Loera's absence created in a clever enough way. And so whether she was surplus to requirements or not, I'm sure that lots of Bay supporters are not happy about this move. But I can squint and see this not being a total loss for Bay. What I think it is a clear win for Utah.
Oh, yeah.
Who did need to fill this position. Fuck it. I really like what Utah's been doing in the post-Amy Rodríguez era.
It makes you think, and who knows if we're right about this, exactly as you say, given everything that they have done from the moment Rodríguez was pushed out the door, really does make you think that a lot of power was in Rodríguez's hands before Cousins was finally able to win that power struggle, which is an incredible thing to ponder, especially because it does not seem like Amy Rodríguez knew what the fuck she was doing. If that scenario is the case, that she was sort of running things from behind the scenes more than Cousins, and then all of a sudden Cousins gets the chance to run with the football. It's just all been home runs, at least so far. Jimmy Coonrotz, the 3 30-somethings from Europe, and now this deal for Loera. It's all worked so far. Does that mean it will continue to work? TBD. But right now, it has worked.
I'm a fan of how Loera fits in this system. I'm a fan of what Loera can do when paired with Zornoza in terms of giving them athleticism, dynamism.
We also talked about Narumi being a good free agent fit, but this is that. Exactly right. And also, you can interchange Ana Tejada and Loera on the midfield and defensive lines because both can be center backs and both can be number 6s, depending on where you think their strengths may lie or how they might best combine with the pieces around them. There's a lot of versatility to this signing, too, that I think is really intriguing.
This is why when we were doing our little free agent draft, I had suggested Miura here.
Yeah.
This is potentially a better piece, but it's the same thinking.
It's a better move than trying to sign Narumi because she is the better player and the younger player.
Exactly. If all of this new ball progression can help get Ali Sentner into better positions, and you just improve where she's shooting from or attacking from by 20%, I just see all the pieces coming into place for Utah in a really nice way.
Absolutely.
That takes them from a laughingstock in the madcap Amy Rodríguez days to one of the better thought through lineups, clubs, assemblages of talent going into next season. And that on its own is a hell of a statement.
Just have to hope that Mina Tanaka and Claudia Zornosa and Chloe Lacasse maintain some level of production in the way that they did once they came over to Utah.
The nice thing is Utah has a lot of youth that they can still throw at the problem. And if some of those pieces hit, I'm not saying Utah is like going to compete to win the title next year, but I think that they are definitely going to compete for a playoff spot. If they play the way they played under Kunratz for the better part of a season, they will be a playoff team.
I think they need another number 9 at least, because
Sure.
I mean the deal with Betfort still isn't done. Apparently they're negotiating a new contract, but we don't know the status of that.
Sure.
And she's still a free agent, so she could go elsewhere. So if without her, then your starting number 9 is Mina, and that's fine. But again, Mina is on the older side, and so you want some cover there. So that's maybe the one thing where I see that's still kind of missing.
We can't know this for a fact, but Utah probably has some space to spend.
Oh, they've got space to spend. It's just a matter of are David Blitzer and Ryan Smith willing to give Cousins the funds to spend it?
They've been making smart decisions on that front so far, but this team is in, and it might not happen in the winter window, but I think that they will be nicely positioned to go acquire pieces next summer. Yeah. Should the opportunity arise, should the team be coalescing in a way that looks like it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. At best, you can say this is a push for Bay FC, but this is just a real big win for the Royals.
All right, let's move on and talk Narumi. You know, where she didn't go is Utah. Where she is going is Washington. How do you feel about this one, Evan?
I think that Washington needed cover in central midfield because you're not going to get Andy Sullivan back till toward the back end of next season at the earliest. And is Heather Stainbrook really the steady pair of hands you want next to Hal Hirschfeld? I don't think so. As good as Stainbrook was in the stretch run, like I think you want someone with a little bit more seasoning, a bit more of a known quantity, and Narumi fills that. I think that 2 years plus a mutual option is probably perfectly fine. She's still young. She turns 28 in July, so she's still in the prime zone. The one thing I'm a little concerned about is that she had a big step back in 2024, was not the defensive powerhouse that she was in 2023. Maybe that's a one-season blip. Maybe she gets back to her old self. Certainly will have less pressure put on her, whereas the thing that there's something that people, especially Courage fans, just really don't want to stare in the face, and that's Denise O'Sullivan's decline. And it is real. It is happening. It really hit a certain point in 2024, and that left Narumi holding the bag on a lot of things. And that might have meant she had to do more than she would have to with Washington. So it's a good move for Narumi. Yep. And I think it's probably at worst steady as she goes for Washington, just to have a steady pair of hands there with Hirschfeld at the 8.
I think it's a great depth piece signing. I suspect.
Well, it won't be depth. I mean, she'll be starting for most of the year.
No. But what I mean is, it is depth piece because Andy Sullivan exists, and they have depth in that position. So if she doesn't work out immediately, there are alternatives. That said, I think playing around better talent probably helps Narumi out here. Mm-hmm. I think that we didn't understate, but I think other people have been slow, not to just to see the decline of Denise O'Sullivan, but to see like the problem of the North Carolina Courage. And I suspect that moving to a better squad will help recover some of what was lost in 2024 as far as her statistical profile is concerned.
Yeah.
And she's like a very steady as you go passer of the ball. And in a Washington team that does not lack for people to put themselves in great positions to receive the ball, that's a great fit. I think this is potentially a move with some real upside.
Yeah.
And with very little downside.
You can count on her. She clocked more than 2,100 minutes. That includes stoppage time in both of the seasons she's been in the NWSL.
Yeah. So if she starts looking more like her 2023 self, I think it's a big win for Washington. And if she is her 2024 self in Washington, it's not really a loss.
Sure.
It's just, it's like a pretty low risk. The needle just doesn't move as much. Let's move on to...
Yeah, there was a hot second where the Kansas City Current had no goalkeepers on their roster, and now they've got 2, which is a big improvement.
Not true anymore.
Yeah. Laurel Ivory got signed to be the backup, coming over from the Seattle Reign on a 1-year plus a mutual option. And then the player who is most likely going to be the starter is Lorena, who is the starting goalkeeper for Brazil. 3 years plus an option. That got officially announced today, but the news had broken last week. Lorena is interesting. She has been with Grêmio for the last 6 years. She was the starting goalkeeper for Brazil, the 2022 Copa America and the 2024 Olympics, would have been that at the World Cup in 2023 and the Gold Cup earlier last year, but for injuries that kept her out. She's going to be 28 next year. Brazil has never really been able to settle on a starting keeper the last couple of tournament cycles, but Lorena has bubbled up to the top of the depth chart. So she comes with some pedigree in that respect. This all started because it seems like Almut Schult wanted to go back to Europe and that she did not want to stay in the NWSL. So it is unfortunate that they lost out on that opportunity. But Kansas City may have found an ideal replacement in Lorena.
Lorena is a goalkeeper that I have only seen play for Brazil. I think that we just don't really have the data to sort of make a call. But Kansas City's been pretty great as far as scouting decisions have been concerned.
So far.
Yeah, so far. So, like, I'm inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think that, like, worst case scenario, you've got in Laurel Ivory a backup who is, like, league average. So, returning to the dog days of AD Franch's decline, which Kansas City endured and was successful with for the first half of last season. I think that Kansas City probably is steady as she goes on these 2 goalkeeper signings without us being able to say this is a home run.
There are some people who still think that KC were not a strong defensive team last year. And it is entirely, and I really can't emphasize this enough, the data proves this more or less beyond a shadow of a doubt. Their biggest defensive problem was Adriana Franch and the goals that she let slip that she should not have let slip based on the qualities of the shots that she faced. It was always going to be important to find a long-term solution at the keeper position. And based on the comments that Caitlin Cardici, the GM for the Current, offered in the official announcement, like, they have a lot of confidence in Lorena. We got to see it in action. It's a big step up from the Brasileirão here in the NWSL. But you know what? Bia Zanerato can do it. Then anything's possible.
They're doing all that sort of intangible front office work that isn't always apparent to us, but they've been just hitting home runs. And Almut Schult was probably in line, if she had stayed for another season, for some measure of regression, because she pretty much stood on her head.
Yeah.
In her KC Current era.
Yeah.
So if Lorena comes in and delivers at Almut Schult's level, you're talking about one of the best goalkeepers in the world. If she comes in and is just like a regressed version of Almut Schult, you still got yourself an above average keeper. And that's all you really need with that defense.
That's right.
All the pieces are there. And I think this is a nice transition to us talking about a move that I think both of us really like. Casey picking up Rocky Rodríguez.
Oh, you really like this?
I like this a lot for them.
Okay.
No. Just, again, it's like the depth piece. It doesn't cost that much.
It cost $100,000. What are you talking about? That's a healthy chunk of change.
Do you think she's a starter for Casey next year?
That's starter money for a player who is going to be, age 32 next year at a position where they were pretty well covered last season? That is a lot of money to spend on a bench piece, in my opinion. But maybe I'm misreading the market. That feels like a fleecing.
I don't think of it that way at all. I think that Rodríguez,
well, she was bad last
season. Yeah, she was bad last year, but also, again, hard to succeed in Los Angeles. Hard to succeed with Angel City last year. The question is, how do you feel about her in relation to the relative health of Lola Labonta? I think that they've plugged a hole that might actually exist.
I think if Lola Bonta's injury was that serious, she would have been put on the SEI list to open up a roster spot back in November. And they didn't do that.
Maybe I just have fond memories of the Rocky Rodríguez Portland Thorns player. And maybe that player doesn't exist again. But if Kansas City can get 80% of that player, I think that they've made a material improvement to their midfield, which was already pretty excellent. And if they have the room to spend the money here.
She's going to be in her age 31 season next year. And for $100,000 for a player who was a net negative on possession value, both for defense and for passing last year, when you already had the player who was arguably the best central mid in the whole league, Lola Bonta, and the player who is probably going to be the face of the position in the United States for years to come, Claire Hutton, who was very good last year. I don't see how Rodríguez supplants either of them as a starter. And then as far as depth is concerned, I guess she is an improvement on their depth options already, but for $100,000? If you have an allocation and transfer budget of such a size that $100K really is funny money, and you don't feel like there's anywhere else in your roster where you could spend that cash
better,
then okay, I guess fine. But is she such an improvement over Bailey Feist for that price relative to where else you have need on the field? Maybe that's where we should talk about. Like, where else do they have need on the field? They've plugged up keeper. They have now gotten a central mid, potentially for the bench.
They are well covered at fullback. They have possibly a need as a backup center back. And then their attack is pretty stacked right now.
Yeah, if Bia can get healthy, yeah.
So I don't mind this so much.
That price tag just really jumped out to me.
For me, I am not looking at this exclusively through the lens of 2024. If you are looking at it and really heavily weighting that as opposed to looking at the Angel City situation and saying, okay, this is a good player on a bad team who's in a bad position with a manager that sort of didn't know how to use this player and some redundancies. And if you want to weight heavily in that direction, I think that's super reasonable. Yeah, maybe this is bad value. My assessment here is we're going to have a fair number of midfield minutes to go around. And so if we want to stash a really competent veteran who is not that far off some pretty excellent seasons and get her in the mix. And I think, like, in terms of style of play, Rocky Rodríguez really does complement the Hutton, Labonta, Feist, DiBernardo, sort of the nucleus around there. She is a good passer of the ball and a good progressive attacker who also wins the ball. But last year was kind of a lost season. And a lost season at age 31 is a much bigger question mark than a lost season at age 25.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we'll see. We're both on the record now.
Yeah.
So we'll see how 2025 pans out for her.
It's an $100,000 mistake at worst, but one that, like, I'm obviously like a little less apprehensive about than you are.
I could get on your side more easily if I just knew how much money they had to spend in that department.
I think your fear is that Casey's pretty tapped.
They ran a very high payroll in 2024. Very high.
Yeah.
And you had to use a lot of allocation money to buy down that salary. How many resources do they have left over after that?
That is totally reasonable. Let's move on to a move that I think what I would describe as potentially very good football decision coming out of Angel City. Julie Dufour.
Transferred from Paris FC, signed a 3-year contract, will be 24 years old in 2025. Winger, left-sided midfielder in her time at Paris FC. So this is where I'm at. She is a very good player who plays a position that Angel City did not have much need for.
I mean, they weren't going to get everything right. I love the profile of this player. Statistically, not that different than what we were looking at from Rosman Kouassi coming over from D1 Arkema in terms of, like, production.
If I remember, I might be wrong about this, but I seem to remember that, like, when we isolated just for games against top teams, that Kouassi's numbers were still pretty strong. I might be wrong about that. But, like, when you do that with...
No, I think you are right about that, by the way.
When you do that with Dufour, and I just did the calendar year of 2024, so it ended up being 5 games against Lyon, PSG, and Chelsea, she's basically, like, average to slightly above average as a winger. So that, should be borne out, or we should bear that in mind, knowing that, like, the degree of difficulty of the defenses that she'll face week in and week out is about to jump up. So, but at the same time, like, we've seen a lot of players like that end up succeeding in when they move over to the NWSL. But the thing that does baffle me is like, you know what you really need at Angel City? You need midfielders. You don't need wingers. Like, this is just...
I mean, you're not wrong. Angel City continues to make baffling decisions as far as like
roster balance.
Yeah, building and balance is concerned. That said, I feel like they've signed a really good player here.
1,000%.
Potentially a really good player.
Cannot disagree
and
with
like,
you there.
And like that baseline they have not been achieving. So
yeah, sure.
So like as far as squad construction is concerned, that's a coach's problem. But if if there's a place to have like lots of different looks and lots of different depth here, I like that Julie Dufour has an eye for goal and like seems to be like a really keen, creative passer of the ball.
Definitely, and that also makes
in the final
third. There are good wide playmakers in this league. Lavelle, Ashley Sanchez. Like, could she potentially function as that and potentially solve their number 10 problem if you use another one of your wingers to sort of fill space a little bit deeper on the other wing and use her more as a wide playmaker rather than force her centrally or force her to become a redundant winger? I don't know. Again, this team doesn't have a head coach right now. This team doesn't have a permanent GM. We don't know what direction they want to head in.
Yeah, totally real. That said, I think when you start getting enough talented, speedy, tricky wingers in a club, like if you can find a way to productively put Alyssa Thompson and Julie Dufour on the field at the same time, and maybe you're converting Claire Emsley to a 10 and asking her to do less athletically, or maybe you're dropping Claire Emsley a little deeper. I think that there are like potentially really interesting. They have a lot of interesting pieces. In attack. Sadly, none of them play striker.
Sadly, none of them. Well, hey, how dare you say that about Sydney Leroux?
One shot a game, Sid Leroux. You will see more shots a game from Julie Dufour. I think that, but frankly, if you're going to get the most out of Sydney Leroux, have a multitude of very talented attacking wingers who can get the ball to her.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to play with the statuesque number 10 or number 9, if you're going to play with the statuesque number 9, have a lot of tricky mobile pieces to move around it, to orbit it.
So now we just get a GM and a head coach that knows how to make all those pieces fit in the correct way.
Yeah. Maybe I just so desperately wanted to deliver some modicum of positive news for our Angel City loyalists. And I felt like signing a good player was a piece of news that was surprising.
Yes.
So there's that. But yeah, no, Angel City, what enters is still so far from the finished article, has so many uncertainties. And like, you know who could have used a Jaelin Howell? Angel
City. That's right.
But they have so much need. So fine. They have signed what looks to be like an 85th percentile winger for a team that maybe didn't need more wingers.
Yeah.
But
so you just gotta
better to have good pieces.
Again, gotta hire the right GM and the right head coach to make it all fit.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, to round things up, we'll hit some big. So college players are starting to sign now, and it seems like most of them, from what I can sift through from the college soccer experts, these seem generally like the players who would have gone pretty high in the first round if a draft had occurred in 2025. So that makes some sense. The best college talent ends up being the first group to sign professional deals. So back in early November, Trinity Byers, who I think was the consensus number 1 overall
presumptive
pick,
number 1,
yeah, she went with San Diego. Potentially could get a starting job out of the gate because they don't have a number 9 right now, and Byers can play there. So, or if you want to like use Shaw more as like a false 9, Byers I think has played as a 10 either at youth national team level or with the University of Texas at some point. So there's some flexibility. If she can hit her ceiling, that could be a really nice signing for San Diego at the moment.
Agreed.
They also grabbed what seemed like probably would have been the number 2 or number 3 overall pick, Quincy McMahon, who has been a left back at UCLA. not necessarily a position that like needs immediate filling for San Diego, but maybe Quincy McMahon ends up going to the bench, or she genuinely challenges for a starting place and pushes Hannah Lindqvist out of the starting 11, or, is there to spell Kristen McNabb when McNabb needs to, rest for a few games due to her advancing years. So that, that could potentially have some value. Brooklyn Courtnall, USC center back, got picked up by North Carolina. They don't really need much center back depth, but also, as I understand it, Courtnall could play out wide. She could potentially be a fullback, could fill in for Feli Rauch or for Ryan Williams, or just be a general sort of all-action utility defender when injuries pop up or when, somebody needs a rest. So that doesn't seem like a terrible fit for NC. Two that got announced today, Sarah Shapansky, winger out of Pitt, grabbed by Gotham. Without Lynn Williams there, with the Crystal Dunn situation sort of an open question, without Midge Purse necessarily re-signing.
Potentially, yeah.
They need wingers. Is Shapansky ready to start on day one will be another question, but she seems to have acquitted herself well at Pitt. So, that seems to address a pressing need for Gotham's attack. Mm-hmm. And then finally, Macy Hodge, who, that's a
midfielder for Angel City.
Yes, she is. And that actually, she comes pretty highly recommended as a defensively minded number 6 or number 8 out of Mississippi State. Covers the loss of Rocky Rodriguez. So, and will likely be less expensive than Rocky Rodriguez, even though Rocky wasn't on huge money. It fills an immediate need. It's just, again, always a question of can she be a starter out of the gate?
Yeah. And if you, a bugaboo is always going to be for me an age 24 rookie.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's,
it worked for Savannah DeMello, but doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah, it was, Croy Bethune was 23.
Yeah.
But there were very serious extenuating circumstances around that. So Macy Hodge, it's, again, as you've said, Angel City don't have a head coach and they don't have a GM. So whoever was in the back room watching Mississippi State games has pulled the trigger, and we hope that the GM and future coach like this trigger pull.
She's got a very interesting story, too. She was a pretty highly rated recruit out of high school and had a lot of anxieties and mental health stuff that caused her to step away so she didn't have a true freshman year, and then ended up at Mississippi State in 2020. And because of the pandemic, everybody gets an extra year of eligibility. So she's not like a 5th year plus a red shirt kind of situation, the way that DeMello was. And again, was generally recognized as pretty great. I mean, she was a first team All-American last year. She was the SEC midfielder of the year. For a college player, she's got pedigree. I think this is also a big group that I'm very interested in to see how they perform at the pro level, because we saw last year, if not necessarily the culmination, but the first really strong signs that the new era of American youth soccer development really in the women's game really come to fruition, which is that the draft was a little thin, and Savannah King had a tough time of it at Bay, and Brecca Mazingo had a tough time of it at Utah, and Allie Sentner was a Rookie of the Year finalist, but her underlying numbers weren't particularly strong, whether that was her, whatever. We're not going to relitigate that. The point being that there would have been a time where a bunch of really excellent players would have been in that draft, and they weren't, because they had already gone pro or they'd gone to Europe, whatever. So what will this group of players be like? Will they be able to really produce as everyday starters? Maybe not this year, but in the coming years in their young careers. Or are they going to settle in as bench pieces? Will they potentially end up in the USL Super League? It's all a big empty road of unknowns right now.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Very interesting to watch. Again, we're in LA, so it'll be very interesting to see Hodge up close and personal week in and week out. That's all the news that's fit to print as far as I am aware before we take off for the Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa holidays. this is it before we take off for the holiday season. Hope everybody has a great Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, or however you celebrate at this time of year. We will be back for a New Year's episode, and then we will finally get a break. We're going to take a week off on main feed after that, which will be very nice. Hell yeah.
All right, guys.
Do all the things. You know all the things. Review us. Rate us 5 stars. I think we're going to extend our annual Patreon subscription sale a week. We're going to extend it through New Year's Eve. So the code is in the show notes. We've been posting it on social. Should probably do something on Instagram for that. But you can get an annual membership to our Patreon for 30% off with a special discount code. So be sure to do that either as a gift for your loved ones or just for yourself to enjoy this holiday season for the next year. Email us at expectedowngoals. That's the letter expectedowngoals@gmail.com if you think we've made an own goal. Still some time to get in what you think have been our biggest own goals, and we will obviously own those on the air for our episode next week.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, one more thing. I am currently editing this year's version of a very X-Own Goals holiday playlist that we will be posting in the show notes and on social media. Nothing but bangers, folks. From our family to yours, have a very happy holiday season, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye, guys.
Everything's gonna be cool this Christmas. Everything's gonna be cool this Christmas. Everything's gonna be cool this Christmas. Everything